won't hurt you.
Yo, bro, you see this new live-action How to Train Your Dragon trailer yet? Hello, yeah, what's up? What's that? Yeah, you know the teaser for the live-action How to Train Your Dragon Disney remake? You see it? DreamWorks, that's what I said. I thought it was meh. I mean, I at least thought the dragons looked kind of cool. I could have used a little bit of... Yeah, just a little bit of a... Huh? Yeah, it was a little bit dry. Oh. Yeah, you know, Toothless. He could have had a little bit more life, a little bit more fun. I mean, I guess. You know, just some more like... Exactly. I got you, bro. Oh, hey, use this. It'll make animations way faster. Hey, yo, sick. Oh, and Steve, don't make the animation suck. I won't. That's not what I was listening to. Can we cut that? All right. Restart. Starting off, as I will with most ambitious projects, I needed to find some great reference material, as I will not let cool Uncle Steph down on this animated project. And it didn't take long to find probably the most epic piece of animated perfection that we've ever witnessed over the past decade. This will work. Then I was on to Blender for some 3D modeling. I was starting with a basic cubicle shape that I definitely added in after first deleting the terrible, awful, no good default cube. For my modeling process, I'm going with the typical box modeling method, just extruding, loop cutting, and scaling portions of this cube out to form our base mesh. I started with the nose and worked my way back to the back of his head with these sort of the little wings behind his eyes, these little fin-like, flare-like, whatever you call them, had to be just right. Then continuing down the neck and adding the bottom part of his jaw in with more extrusions and basic cubicle modeling. Going on and adding some extra details like the little tiny horn-like knobs that he has at the back of his head, or maybe they're just fins. How am I supposed to know? Once the overall shape of the head was coming together, the most important part was going to be the eyeballs. The eyes are where the emotion comes from, so getting these just in the right spot was going to be crucial. Playing around with some proportions and then moving down along the body. Again, more extrusions, more scaling, and more rotating, and then going on to form the tail of our character. At this point, our character needed wings, because how is a dragon gonna fly without wings? So of course, I think these wings are added to the tail. I'm not 100% sure in that, but pretty sure that's where you would control your flying mechanics. So we're adding his flight fins to his tail. Then of course, Toothless isn't gonna slither around like a snake, so we had to add some feet. Again, using basic box modeling techniques and mirroring it to the left side to streamline our modeling process. Of course, sparing no expense to the details, adding things like toes and toenails to our character. Same thing for the arms. We'll give him arms and hands, but no fingers, because fingers are creepy and lame. After further thought, just wings on the tail might not be enough for flight, so we added a little bit of fins in the back of the neck as well. Now this dragon will fly, no problem. So you might be thinking, we're done with the details. No, you couldn't be more wrong. At this point, I was fully committed and on to baking even more details to our mesh. So I duplicated our base mesh, adding a multi-resolution modifier to this new mesh and subdividing it way more times than before. Switching to sculpt mode, I painstakingly went through adding little details to our character, scales across the skin, little details and imperfections, all to bring this character to a new level of life. My process was starting with the layer brush to add the base details, then switching to the flatten brush to kind of flatten off these scales, then lastly using the pinch tool to kind of give some sharper corners to these details. Once I was happy with the details across the entire mesh, I had to switch over to cycles render for baking. Then choosing the normal baking mode, I used selected to active. I would grab my high resolution mesh first, low resolution mesh second, and then bake away. This process is kind of finicky. Unless you do it just right, you're probably going to mess up. Some important details is have blank materials on both models, have a blank texture, select a new material window. With all that set up though, once you bake a texture, connect it to the normal map node into a basic diffuse shader, you can see I achieved those extra details while still retaining our low resolution mesh. But was it time to sit back and admire our work? Heck no! We're on to the next step of painting our mesh. For this, I used the new paint system add-on. It's available on Gumroad. It's a pretty cool add-on, and it would be awesome for doing things like arcane style rendering, a topic actually that I'm really close to doing as a YouTube Blender tutorial. So if you guys want it, let me know in the comments, because I probably would do it. So after I installed it in the preferences, the add-on shows up in your properties window. All I had to do is pick a base underlying color and then just toggle paint mode. The add-on comes with 2 default brushes, which of course you can add more. I just picked a nice lighter color for some highlights, started started painstakingly painting around some of these details on our character, switching from highlights to shadows to add some extra 2.5D definition. I also used some bigger brushes just to kind of give the mesh an overall paintery look, giving this character a little bit more uniqueness and style. Using a lighter material to brighten up some of these scales on the skin, adding some outlying painted on shadows. I did this as details across the mesh in various areas until at last I was getting somewhat confident that cool Uncle Steph might approve. I did the same thing with some paint layers on the eyes, painting a base mesh and then using a second image overlay for the iris. And I just felt like this style was the direction to go to kind of pull this character together. I figured I should probably add some better materials to the character. So all I had to do for this was, for the rendering, load up an HDR in the background in combination with a sun lamp to cast some nice realistic shadows. And then for this material, I had my texture paint map already. That connected to the principled shader node with a color ramp controlling a subtle bit of the reflections on our character to give it a little bit of a wet skin look. I don't want to go too crazy with this to make him look soaking wet. I wanted kind of that dry reptile skin and a little bit of subsurface scattering to allow some light pass through on our mesh. Again, going subtle on this so it doesn't look like he's about to shoot freaking fireballs. And I used a leather texture here to add just a little bit of height to our bump map for a slight bit of reptile skin look. Kept it very subtle, don't want to go over the top with this. I was also stoked to be testing out the brand new RTX 5080 Advanced from Colorful throughout this project. And their version of it features an advanced triple fan cooler setup that works to keep the GPU near silent even under heavy workloads. Went ahead and threw some of the more advanced Blender benchmarks at this GPU to see how it handled it compared to previous generations. As you can see in the classic barbershop GPU benchmark here, 5080 is coming in just behind the RTX 4090 and well ahead of the RTX 3090 from a few years ago now. This version of the RTX 5080 has a one button option overclock feature, and I took this and pushed it a bit further with some manual overclocking, and it turns out that the RTX 5080 is a great overclocking card, as you can see in the benchmarks. And my overclocks here aren't just overclocks, they're also undervolts, so I highly recommend enabling the overclock BIOS on these cards and pushing it even further if you're comfortable using something like MSI Afterburner and tweaking with some overclock settings. Your mileage will always vary with overclocking, but the RTX 5080 seems particularly good, which puts it right about where you would expect. It seemed even closer to the 4090 in performance with gaming benchmarks like the 3D Mark Port Royal benchmark, and it's crazy to see how much the RTX 5080 is already leaving the 2-generation-old RTX 3090 in the dust. But even cooler, power usage is down on the 5080 compared to the 4090 and 3090, and you can see at stock it draws on average 100 watts less than the 4090. And comparing the temperatures, you can really see where Colorful's advanced triple fan header cooler really works well. I don't have a 5080 Founders card to compare it to in the studio, but you can see that compared to the previous generation Founder cards, it runs 10 to 15 degrees cooler. So Colorful is definitely doing something right with their triple fan cooler. Being a bit of a beefy card, they also include a nice quality GPU bracket to avoid any sort of GPU sag you might have in your system. And overall, the build quality of the Colorful card seems pretty decent. Definitely a GPU that I would consider if you're a 3D artist and looking to upgrade your rendering compatibilities. The only downside I found is that the RTX 5080 is limited to 16 gigabytes of VRAM. I've only found one scene that I have that requires more than 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and I wasn't able to render it on this GPU. But if you're doing some really large complex scenes that you're rendering in 4K or maybe even 8K, the 4090 or 5090 might be more of what you need. I'll put a link to the card down in the description, but that's enough about the tech that we're using. We have something to finish. Now I had to add bones to the character so we could add that epic animation. Adding in an armature, placing a few bones across the nose and the mouth area, and then up along the body, only adding bones where I feel like bending animation will be necessary. Once I had bones across the entire body, I went through adding vertex groups to each of these bones to control different portions of the mesh for those clean deformations during animation. And most importantly, I inverted a bone right at the hips. So I had a bone that I could rotate around for some of that hip swinging movement. This was going to be critical to our animation. At last though, I had all the bones controlling the right portions of the mesh, and it was time to settle in and do some epic animating. Drawing from all of my years of experience animating different characters in Blender, and none of them, not one of them, had been as important as this one. Spending hours upon hours upon hours upon hours getting the animation, fine-tuning it, and tweaking it to perfection. It's not just the world who's counting on me right now, it's cool Uncle Steph, and I'm not gonna let him down. Not ever! Not ever! I'm sorry. I got a little emotional here, but it's just so important to me. After spending months upon months upon months, the animation process was complete. All it was left was to add some extra physics to this animation to take it to that next level. For these physics, I wanted some natural skin movements to some of the looser areas of our mesh, specifically these back tentacles behind Toothless's head and his wings. So I made a weight paint map group for all of these different areas of the mesh, painting them in. Then I added cloth physics to our character, gave it a little bit of internal pressure, then I used that weight paint map as a pin group to determine which areas of the mesh have that soft skin effect. And then when I played back that simulation, it didn't work. So this wasn't great. So I realized at this point that I had to invert my weight paint map group, go back to our cloth settings and use our inverted group now, and that was working a bit better. You can see some of those soft areas of the skin flapping around with our animation, and man, I tell you this, I feel like we might have perfection on our hands. The last few remaining steps was to combine this with the live footage from the How to Train Your Dragon trailer. For this, I added a mesh in that would be a shadow catcher to capture realistic shadows from our character. Then to help blend the character into the environment, I scattered some assets across this object using G-Scatter and my realistic Nature Essentials asset pack, choosing some of my more jungly-like assets and scattering them across the plane, even going as far as adding a little bit of animation to like these ferns, using the G-Scatter wind feature along with these Nature Essential assets. Adding in a few extra assets like these sticks and small oak plants really helped to blend this into the live footage. One of the steps I'm doing here is projecting the live action footage on a plane that wraps under his feet and around the back of our model, having it not cast shadows but just there for diffuse and bounce lighting, and it helped do a little more to pull it into the scene. Now here I am starting to question, should I have gone as far as adding dust and sand particles to the ground of this animation? And the answer I kept coming to was, heck yeah! They clearly had this in the live action trailer, as you can see, and if I failed cool Uncle Steph, I would never recover. This was made by stimulating some particles with a short lifespan off a base mesh, and then using Blender's internal smoke generator to cast some smoke that would quickly dissolve and fall fast to the ground. I would take these small animations, save them as a bake file to my computer, and then import them as an open VDB file back into my animated scene, placing them everywhere I had a foot move quickly across the ground for those sand particles. At this point, there was nothing left I could do. I did everything I could, so all I could do was sit back and hope that it was good enough for cool Uncle Steph.
I won't hurt you.
That was so much better!